and shakers in the business world to the school, because this is where the world of business meets the world. And so I'm super honored that we have brought one of our own, April Rinne, Fletcher 04. She is very dear to us. She is a top female 50 futurist. Amongst many other things. Bhaskar Chakraborty, our Dean of Global Business, will introduce her more formally. But I want to welcome everybody, and I want to thank our co-sponsors, our Fletcher Office of Career Services, as well as the Career Service Office at the Friedman School, the LA Block and Family Career Center. Would Alana and Melissa, would you like to just say hello and say a few words before we turn it over to our Dean?
I'm happy to do that. Hello, everyone. This is Ilana Givens, the Director of the Fletcher Office of Career Services, and I'm delighted to partner with Dorothy and IBGC and also with Melissa Palmer of Friedman to bring exciting speakers like April to talk to us and give us an idea of different ways of thinking, the future, just, shake our perceptions of things and expand our minds. And I'm just delighted to be here with all of you. Thank you.
And I'm Melissa Palmer. I'm the director of the Career Center at the Friedman School. And I'm so excited to be able to collaborate with Fletcher to just be a part of this conversation and to bring the very amazing communities of both Fletcher and Friedman together to talk about this. You are in for a real treat with April. I get her newsletter, and if you don't, let me encourage you to sign up for it because it is chocked full of just good, rich ideas and food for thought and encouragement, and we are in for a real treat tonight. So welcome everyone, and hope that at some point you'll, if you're comfortable, to put yourself on camera so that even though we're in the midst of this hybrid event, that we can make it as participatory as possible and connect as much as we're able to.
Wonderful. And so on this note, I'm going to turn it over to our Global Business Dean, Dean Chakraborty. I'm going to have you come and speak to the owl.
Okay, great. I'm speaking to the owl. I'm not sure if I'm looking people in the face or not. If I'm not, I apologize because I'm not quite sure where to look. I'm sort of looking at the owl. I'm looking at Melissa. I'm looking at April, and I'm looking at several of our students here. I see some familiar faces just on top of my screen. Martin Furlong. So April, you draw a whole bunch of old Fletcher faces here, so it's great to see all of you. So I'm not going to take up much time introducing April because you'll get a sense of who she is just by her energy bouncing off the screen as she comes on. I have every time I've met April, I sort of left with a sense of exhaustion actually. Because she is so full of ideas and and perspectives, and literally helps you think about the world through a new perspective. And in fact, she practices it with her headstands, which I'm sure it's not the first time people have mentioned April's headstanding capabilities, but that's a way to look at the world in a different way. I've also been a recipient of April's, I'm not sure this is a newsletter, but I seem to remember the end of the year letter that normally people send out. And the usual end of the year letter is about a page long, and April's is like a book. And it's exhausting to read about all the places that April has been in any given year and all the things she's done. And she covers it in such interesting depth and detail that you feel you've traveled with April and got a perspective of the world, not just upside down, but all around. April, of course, is a proud alumna of the Fletcher School. She also picked up a degree from college down the road, Harvard Law School, and subsequently has had a spectacular career as a futurist and as an advisor on many things that are around the corner. One thing that I still remember from April is her ideas about the sharing economy and where all of that was headed. So I'm sure we'll get to know a little bit about the sharing economy and April sharing her ideas about where to take your own life and where the world is headed. through her latest book, Flux, and we'll learn more about what Flux is going to do to us. So without taking up any more time, I give the floor to April, and perhaps April, I can just, this is meant to be a fireside chat. There is no fire, but we'll have a chat. I guess the first question is, what the Flux? What is Flux?
Thank you so much, Bhaskar and Dorothy and Melissa and Elena and everyone who's here today. This is a real joy to reconnect. And I can't help but chuckle when I hear you say that I exhaust you. I will take that as a compliment. I think this is an amazing time to be alive in this world. For all of the difficulties and challenges and problems that we have all around us today and on the horizon, I look at that as one giant opportunity to actually improve the state of the world. So Flux and this book I wrote and this concept, where did it come from and why did I end up writing a book about it and joining you all today? And I will say, there's a heavy piece of this story that does relate to Fletcher. So I'll mention that now, but I think we can probably circle back to it over time. So a lot of people, my book came out 2 months ago. A lot of people have been saying, oh, Flux, a world in flux. You wrote a book about the pandemic in 2020, like welcome to my life. And I have to reply, no, I actually didn't write a book about 2020 or the pandemic or any particular change or any particular year. Although the last 19 months have been an incredible acceleration and validation of my ideas, I've been interested in humans' relationships to change and how we navigate, not just one change here, one change there, but constant, relentless change. You can think about this individually, organizationally, societally. You can think about changes in your personal life or your professional life. You can think about changes in how you're learning today, how we're working, how we're leading. All of this relates to flux. So I've been interested in this concept for, I like to say, the better part of, most of my life, but the book was 3 years in the writing. I've been working on it since 2018, but it's more like almost 3 decades in the making. And I can say that I was already interested in flux when I was at Fletcher, no question about that, although I wouldn't have predicted at that time that I would write a book about it. So the way that I like to frame it is that I really bring 3 lenses or perspectives on change, all of which show up in the book, but more broadly show up in life. So the first is, as Bhaskar mentioned, that of a futurist. So for the past several years, I've been known as a futurist. Well, some of you might have questions, what is a futurist? Think of me as a kind of strategic advisor that is helping organizations figure out where is the future heading and how do I and my organization fit into it? And when I say organizations, I'm working with startups and established companies and governments and think tanks and nonprofits and international organizations and development banks and a lot of the kinds of organizations that I learned about and worked with while I was at Fletcher. And I'm not helping them predict the future. Well, we might come back to this because there is no one future that any one of us can predict or control. I'm trying to help them understand what are the macro forces that are going to determine which way the future goes and how do you prepare for a bunch of different possible futures. And in this context, I have learned that every single organization on the planet struggles with change. Now, not necessarily in the same ways, but oh my goodness, there is so much room for improvement. And yes, we've had a window into that over the last year and a half, but just in general, organizations are generally designed for a world that is kind of neat and tidy and orderly and predictable. And we're going to make our projections and then meet them this year and next year. That's not the world we live in today. When the world is in flux, a lot of organizations just really, they struggle on the human level, on the institutional level, etc. So that's the first lens. The second lens, which is so closely related to Fletcher, makes me really just my heart sing, is global. So I bring a global lens on change. And what I mean by that is, like many of you, my entire career has been international. Now, I have been to more than 100 countries. I've worked in more than 50 of them. And that has given me an incredible exposure to different cultures, norms, business models, ways of thinking and being and living. And what that has taught me is that every single culture and society on the planet also struggles with change, but also has developed unique ways of seeing change, talking about change, concepts and rituals and traditions related to change. And that is a beautiful thing because there is so much that we can learn from one another. So another piece that my book brings to the table is I'm sort of connecting a bunch of dots between insights we can learn from different places, different peoples on the planet that will help all of us navigate change better. So it didn't come up yet, but I spent the first half of my career and really started planting this seed for the global career. I had done global work prior to Fletcher, but then while I was at Fletcher, I really got much more interested in global development and inclusive business models. And so the first 15 years of my career were focused on microfinance and financial inclusion and how do we build business that is sustainable for the base of the economic pyramid. And I learned so much as a result of that, about how entrepreneurs around the world navigate change, how public policymakers navigate change. And there's not like one that's right and one that's wrong. Everybody has, every culture has really great things about how they navigate change, and every culture struggles with it. So my Fletcher experience ties directly into that lens that I bring to change as well. And the third lens on change is what I call candidly, my lived human experience with change and uncertainty. And I like to say that my baptism or my entry into Flux happened more than 25 years ago when I was in college. At the age of 20, both of my parents died in a car accident. And I share that not to, I realize I've just kind of put a hand grenade into the conversation. That is not my intention at all. I'm actually really happy. It brings me great joy to be able to talk about this because I realize just how many people struggle with grief and anxiety and the emotions around change and loss and so forth. But what I realized is that when I was 20, at that moment in my life, in my history, everything changed. My entire future sort of melted before my eyes. I had to figure out, how do I rebuild my family? What do I do about my grief and anxiety? What about my career, right? All of a sudden, I had to grow up really fast and become self-sufficient. And this was before I went to Fletcher, but it shaped how I saw my Fletcher experience and everything that happened next. And really, it boils down to, for me, two different questions. One is, what do I do when I don't know what to do, right? And I think a lot of people can relate to that sort of question today. And secondly, from a kind of existential point of view, if I were to die tomorrow, because I have no intention of that, but it could happen to any one of us, right? If I were to die tomorrow, what would the world need me to do today? And those questions really shaped how I saw my time at Fletcher. It shaped how I crafted my career. And some of this we're going to come back to for sure, as it relates to where all of you are today and looking out at this big, kind of exciting, kind of scary world. And like, what decisions do you make? Where do you look for opportunities? What might you build or create on your own? And so that really grounds me and roots me in terms of my quest to better understand humans' relationships to change, and ultimately led to writing this book, Flux, that I think about it now. I've just been peeling back the layers of that onion around how do humans relate to change and learn to navigate constant change better? Because one other final footnote here that will come up again, it's not just what is changing today, it's also how fast things are changing. And the way that I like to phrase this is that the pace of change has never been as fast as it is today, and yet it is likely to never again be this slow. And if you just pause for a moment and let that sink in, it's kind of exciting, I think. And it's also kind of terrifying, right? That however fast, however much change we think there is today, there's more on the horizon, and more next week and more next month and more next year. And oh my goodness, are we ready for it? I reckon we're not, but that as a result, we've all been given a huge opportunity for growth and improvement and better better relating and having a stronger, more healthy relationship to change moving forward. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit of an introduction, and a little bit of a tee up for the rest of our time together.
Great, thank you, April, for setting the table so beautifully. Before we kind of go into the book and some of the ideas you got in the book, help us get into the Flux mindset a little bit. I know that every one of us can tell a story about how we related to uncertainty, because the last 20 months is just proof that we have, and we are inherently fluxy individuals, because look at the change that was visited upon us without much warning, and here we are. So as you think about change and the fact that we're going through rapid change, and it's more rapid, as you said, now than it was before, and tomorrow it's going to be even more rapid. What are some of the two or three drivers of change that you would ask us to think about, just as an example for us to, kind of get into it, apart from, of course, everything relating to the pandemic?
Yeah, so great question. And so super entry. Pause for a moment and consider that change is complicated. It's messy, right? Think about just change as a whole. Humans tend to love certain kinds of change. Generally, the changes we can opt into, right? So a new adventure, a new relationship, a new job, a new haircut, right? A new class you could take. I tend to be pretty excited about those kinds of changes. We tend to really struggle with the kinds of changes we can't control. So the kind of change that blindsides you on a Tuesday afternoon, it goes against your expectations, it disrupts your plans, right? That's a lot of the kinds of changes we've had over the last 19 months. Now, meanwhile, think about this. A change that's really easy for you might be really difficult for me, and vice versa, right? For some people, moving to a new place every year, for some people, that's super easy. For other people, that is disruptive and anxiety producing every time it happens. For another person, traveling a lot is super fun. We love that kind of change. For another person, really, no, not like that, please. For another person, not knowing what their schedule holds each day is exciting. For someone else, that's nerve-wracking. I mean, these are all different kinds of changes. And again, I encourage you to think about this at the individual level, and that's both in your personal life, but also in your professional life or your studying academic life. It's also organizational, it's also societal. So we know, another example is, we know that more change is around the corner, yet knowing this often freaks us out, right? So we have this kind of complicated, messy relationship to change. And that's not good or bad, it is. It's part of the human condition, right? So looking back, I would ask all of us, I think, yes, we've all learned and grown over the last 18 months, but in what ways do you wish you could have related to some kinds of change better? And as you look towards the future, what do you wish to improve? And so just a quick footnote here, I could not have predicted the world that my book would enter. I could not candidly have scripted a better time to launch my book, right? Everyone's going, wow, my world is flux. The world, like you've just described what we're living in. And yet I love the fact that flux is applicable in the here and now. But I'm actually even more interested in this much longer term, sort of timeless arc of human history, in which we were struggling with a world in flux before the pandemic hit. It was just a little bit easier to hide and bury some of the challenges that we faced. When change hits, a lot of the stuff, the world gets flipped upside down, and all of a sudden we see things we couldn't see before. We identified problems that were festering before the pandemic hit. And here we could be talking about, global development and global inequities. We could be talking about social justice and tolerance. We could be talking about climate. I mean, these are all different examples of flux as well. And so change just makes that all the more evident. So I like to bring that up because think about this as in the here and now, or think about this as what I like to say is flux and these 8 flux superpowers. They are not skills just for work. They are not skills just for today. These are life skills from here on out. So coming back to the word flux, what does it mean? It's actually both a noun and a verb. And as a noun, which is how most people know it, it means continuous change, right? Things are in flux. Flux is also a verb, and the verb to flux means to learn to become fluid. And I love that because I sort of look at this as the world is in flux and we all need to learn how to flux, how to be a bit more, as I like to say, fluxy, which relates to being resilient and agile and nimble and adaptable and all of that. But it also relates to this notion of constant change. A lot of times what we do is we think about reacting to change or managing change or engineering change to go in our favor. And those things aren't bad, but what we're doing is we're sort of assuming that if I react to that change, then things will go back to the way they were. If I react to that change, then we'll go back to where we were. And what we're looking at is a world in which by the time you've reacted to this change, something else has changed. And then that thing you had changed is changing again. And it's just this constant, relentless change. And that requires a different relationship to it. And so it's fascinating because a lot of people have said, oh, you wrote a book about change, or sometimes in the business setting, Bhaskar, you'll appreciate this. They've said, oh, you wrote a book about change management. And I'm like, no, nope. I wrote a book about humans' relationships to change. And I want to tease this out just for a moment because I find that many humans and many organizations get this backwards. And what I mean by that is we focus on developing a change management strategy. We worry about investing in uncertainty. But what we fail to remember or even realize sometimes is that every single investment, strategy, or decision you make is fundamentally rooted in your mindset. So, do you see change from a place of hope or fear? That's not strategy, that's mindset. Do you think that things will go to plan and then get anxious or unravel when they don't? That's not strategy, that's mindset. And so as part of this, one of the key concepts, there are 3 key concepts to flux, but I'll talk about 2 of them right now. The first one and the core one is this notion of a flux mindset. Well, what is that? That is the state of mind or the ability to see all change. So good or bad, whether you expected it or it's out of left field, whether you want it to happen, or especially changes you don't want to have happen, but they hit you sideways anyway, to see all change as an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to improve. So another way to put it is, it's the ability to lean into uncertainty precisely because you're not trying to make it something different. So you're not resisting that change that feels threatening or scary. You're actually able to say, this is happening. I can't necessarily control it, but I can lean into the ways it can make me better. So a flux mindset is central to the book. It's explained in the introduction and all the rest. But then that's sort of the first step is to open a flux mindset, which is basically acknowledging that my relationship, your relationship to change can evolve and improve. And then the second step is to use your flux mindset to unlock and develop your 8 flux superpowers. And these are the practices and disciplines and skills. I think of them as the how to thrive in constant change. And we can get into those a little bit more as well. Now, one final quick point. So flux mindset, flux superpowers. When it comes to our relationship to change, I would encourage all of you as we're talking today, or maybe after this session, to just pause and think about where your relationship to change began. When did you start, and why and how did you start to love certain kinds of changes and really resist or struggle with other kinds? And again, there's not a right or wrong answer, or nothing's good or bad. Everything is both and. But for many of us, our relationships to change begin really young, and they're part of what I call our scripts. And our scripts are the norms and narratives and stories that we tell ourselves and that we're largely taught by others about the world we expect to live in and our place in it. And this includes our stories and narratives that we tell ourselves about change. So for example, I'll just, a couple questions to throw out, because our relationships to change, they begin young. So when you were growing up, were you taught to were you taught to approach change from a place of hope or fear? Similar to the question I asked earlier. Were you taught that uncertainty was dangerous, or was it just an adventure for your curiosity? Were you taught that if you did the right things and followed the rules and went the straight path, if you will, that you would be successful? Or were you told that actually it's on the detours and the curves, and when life throws you curveballs, to go off-roading, that's where a successful life was to be found? So all of these narratives really shape our relationship to change. And why that matters so much is that when the world is thrown into flux, like we've seen over the last 18 months, a lot of our script, a lot of these narratives and norms get flipped upside down. So assumptions and expectations no longer hold. We start to feel anxious when we used to feel calm. A lot of stuff gets jostled around. And what we're realizing, and I think my hunch is that a lot of students who are here today will have some empathy, or at least some sympathy for this sense that the world that we were taught we would inhabit if we followed the rules and did what we were supposed to, et cetera, really isn't the world that we're living in today. And the norms and narratives we've been told about how the world works really don't align very well with the world that we live in. And we need to fix that. We need to actually update and upgrade our scripts, our norms and narratives, and the systems and tools that we use to filter change in order to be fit for a world in flux. Because the world is not more, and the future for sure, is not more stable or more certain or more predictable. The future is actually much more uncertain, much more unstable, unpredictable. And that goes against a lot of what we've been taught. And yet, so that's a huge challenge, which is also just this opportunity in disguise for us to all level up and actually relate to change much, much more productively and in a healthy way moving forward. So that again is a bit of a download, but now you've got Flux and Flux Mindset and Flux Superpowers, and we can dig into a lot more in greater detail.
Yeah, so let's dig in, April. So as I listened to you talking, I was kind of wondering, what are what's my personal response to change, right? And so I haven't had the benefit of your framework as yet. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from you about some of the superpowers that you talk about in the book. So my personal response or preparation for change is a word very close to flux called flex. Bend to the winds as they keep changing, and you don't bend too much. You flex so you can potentially come back. So I don't know if that's one of the superpowers. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your framework, of these 8 superpowers, and maybe you can pick a couple that you think are the first ones to think about as one tries to create such a mindset for ourselves. And again, some examples that would be really helpful.
You bet. And I just realized we did a wonderful tech check. I don't know if we made me able to share my screen. I don't need to, but I have one slide that is actually an overview of the superpowers that I will pop up if I'm able. And if I'm not, do not worry about it at all. Can anyone help me with this? Am I able to share my screen?
Yes, hang on.
Maybe I can. Perfect.
Not from here.
Yeah, you can. You should be
All right,
able to.
I'm going to try and you guys let me know if you see my little screen, okay? That's how we're going to find out. Perfect. So let's see. Oops, hang on.
Yeah.
Did that work?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so the 8 Flux superpowers, each of these is a chapter in the book. I always like to tell people a couple things to keep in mind. One is that this is a menu, not a syllabus. So you do not have to do 1 before 2 or 2 before 3. You can get interested in just 1 or all 8. You can candidly, after you read the intro of the book, if you decide to read the book, you can read the book backwards, which I love. You can go to wherever your curiosity takes you. And that's what I encourage people to do, because the second point in all of this is that several, if not all, of these superpowers are counterintuitive in some way. They're even a bit contrarian. They run against the grain of what society has taught us about what we're supposed to do when change hits. And as a result, some of these make people uncomfortable. And I love that. So I always encourage people, as I'm just giving a brief description, pay attention to when you hear something and you're like, oof, That is not what I was taught. Like, whoa, that runs against what I believe makes a person successful or is the way the world is supposed to work. That's terrific. That is a signal where your relationship to change and how you think about change may need a bit of attention. Okay, so these are the 8. Well, not in any particular order, in the order in which they're featured in the book. The first one is run slower, which right away people usually go, nope, wait, hang on. I'm told to run fast. I'm told that when the pace of change quickens, I'm supposed to run faster. Run slower, and I'll come back to this. I'm just going to give a brief overview of all 8 right now. Run slower is all about anxiety and burnout and how we make wiser decisions. See what's invisible is all about when change hits, what do we choose to focus on? How do we identify our blind spots? Where do we discover new or invisible value, opportunities, and insights? The third Flux superpower is get lost. So I'm going clockwise around this circle. The third one is get lost, which is all about how do we stretch beyond our comfort zones and our relationship to the unknown. The fourth one is start with trust. Now, this is all about how we navigate change together. And I often call this superpower the superpower. So much more than any other single superpower, so much about how we navigate change well comes back to trust. So we can dig into this topic more if you want. The fifth superpower is know you're enough. And this is all about our relationship, or our obsession with more. And anyone who's interested in sustainability studies or doing that right now, this one is probably going to hit pretty close to your heart. The punchline of this superpower is that when we are always after more, and again, think about our scripts and what society normally tells us, that more is better. And I'm not saying that more is not bad. I'm not saying more is bad. I'm just saying, hang on a minute. When we are always after more, and here I'm not just talking about more money or more power, I'm talking about more likes, more clicks, more followers, more clothes, more whatever. When we are always after more and our growth models are designed only to measure more, we will never, by design, we will never find enough. Because think about it, what happens when once you get more, what do you want? You want more and more and more. And not only is that leading to living on an unsustainable planet, but it's also leading to a lot of people feeling like they will never have or earn or do or be enough. And yet, when you know you're enough, and that includes knowing that you are enough, just as you are right here and right now. So this is not a typo. It's both YOUR as well as YOU''RE. When you know you're enough, you will immediately begin to see abundance. So I have a funny feeling there might be some people here today who want to circle back to this superpower. I'm happy to do so. The sixth superpower, which I know we will come back to today because it was in the title of the session, is create your portfolio career. And this is all about how we think about our careers, our career development, and our professional identity in ways that are fit for a future of work in flux. The seventh superpower is be all the more human. This is all about our relationship to technology and the tension we face in that we're spending ever more time with our devices and yet ever less time with one another. And yet the way we navigate change well is all about human connection. And last but not least, the eighth Flux superpower is let go of the future, which again, probably rubs some of you the wrong way. And I've been told by a lot of people, like, you're a futurist. You can't say let go of the future. Let me explain. Lo and behold, this is not about failure or giving up or doomsdaying. This is rather about the fact that we need to let go of our need and our obsession with wanting to predict the future in order to let better futures emerge. So it's actually a rather hopeful and uplifting message, but it's about getting out of our own way and learning to let go. So this is all about our relationship to control, which I find is difficult for pretty much everybody to some degree today. So those are the 8 Flux Superpowers. And Bhaskar, I don't know if we want to dive into a couple of those in particular, or if we want to pause and see if there are any questions. I'm happy to go whichever way you'd like.
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to get lots of questions around the 8, but before we get there, I'd love to dig into one of the superpowers that is going to be high on people's minds, and I'm assuming that's the case, and it's an intriguing one, which is the notion of a portfolio career. So if you could talk to that for a little bit, April, and perhaps also tell us about your personal experience with a portfolio career. And
Yes.
really contemplated that when you were at Fletcher. So, let's pick up on that, and I'm sure we're going to get questions across the whole week.
Awesome. So, and I'm just now posting in the chat. I wrote an article in, if you don't want to read the book or the whole chapter, that's totally understandable. I wrote a piece in the Harvard Business Review 2 weeks ago that's all about this. And it's actually specifically for younger talent, people who are starting out in their career. And what I'm able to say, so here I'll come back to like, what is exactly a portfolio career in a minute. I had a portfolio career before I got to Fletcher. And I think I was one of the most frustrated students, not at Fletcher, not because of this, but I have always had a portfolio career. And you can read the first couple sentences or the first couple paragraphs of the article I just posted, and you'll see why. And I spent so long really frustrated because it felt like I didn't fit into any particular box. People said I was interested in too many things. People said that I wasn't going, I had zero interest in climbing a corporate ladder. And they said that was going to ruin my career by not doing so. I got a lot of flack for it. But I now realize that basically, we are now living in a world in which there are more ways to work and earn income and create a livelihood and have meaning and purpose than ever before. And the old narrative, so back to these scripts of, if you think about the traditional script and the one that a lot of us are still taught, I certainly was, which is study hard, get good grades, go to college, get good grades there, go to graduate school, get good grades there, track into a job, do said job for a long time, climb the ladder, retire. There you go. Like study, work, retire. It's very linear. It's very predictable. It's very one way. You know what you're supposed to do. And you're told that success is at the top of the ladder and that, and that this is all going to work out for you. And what's happening these days, and again, this is not unique to the last 18 months. I'm guessing some of you have heard of the Great Resignation, where 40+% of Americans have actually indicated that they are considering leaving their employer this year. That is astounding. The Great Resignation completely, beautifully aligns with a portfolio career, and I'll come back to why that is. So the last 18 months have been sort of like kindling, like that it's lit this on fire. But the reasons why a portfolio career matter have been existent for decades. But for a long time, we were taught this narrative of study, work, retire. And it was assumed that it was not only the reality of how the workplace would work, but it was actually the goal and it was the dream, and everybody wanted to be at the top of the ladder. What's happening these days is the ladder's not, and I use the ladder figuratively for just how we proceed, how we think about our professional development and our career. We're going to climb a career ladder of some sort. And the challenge is that ladder is not working for a whole lot of people. And a whole lot of people don't want that kind of future. They don't identify with a one-way script that in many cases someone else wrote for them. They didn't actually determine what they wanted their career to be. And so the concept of a portfolio career and the way that the chapter tees it up, but that I tee it up as well, is that to succeed in a future of work that is, again, full of uncertainty, full of changes, full of new technologies, this, that, and the other, we need to think about our careers less as singular paths to pursue, this linear path, and more like portfolios to create and to curate. And you can think about portfolios in a few different ways. You can think about a portfolio as an artist would think about it, right? So what's in an artist's portfolio? Their best works of art, right? Everything that they're most proud of, it's all in there. You can think about it as an investor would think about their portfolio. What's in an investor's portfolio? Usually a diversified blend of investments that is designed to maximize return on value and minimize and mitigate risk, right? You can think about portfolio theory from BCG has portfolio theory that executives used to really map where their company was today or is today with where it wants to be in the future and which business models are likely to succeed. You can think about a portfolio simply as a tool you use to organize the things that you care about. So I'm agnostic as to which kind of portfolio you think of, you use here, but they all make sense. And so again, typically when we're in this linear world of work, we think about our professional identity is reflected on our resume, right? And resumes are fine. LinkedIn profiles are fine. I have one. I use LinkedIn every day. Works pretty well for me. Does LinkedIn really, and here, not about LinkedIn, does my resume contain everything that makes me me and helps me bring value to organizations? Not at all. Does my resume contain the things that I care most about that go beyond work? Not usually. We don't have a place for that. And yet, when I think about having a professional identity and a professional future that maximizes meaning and value in the ways that I can contribute to the world, my resume can't hold that. And no particular job description can hold that either. And, oh, by the way, I don't actually want to always just have a job. I want to create my own things. I want to be self-employed. I want to be independent. Where's that? So in my portfolio today, this is where I like to say that in my case, I knew I had a portfolio as long back as I can remember, but for most of my life, we didn't have language to describe it. And in many cases, it was sort of stigmatized. Like I said, I was told you can't focus on one thing. Your resume makes no sense. That's what I was told even before I got to Fletcher. And I was sitting there going like, wait a minute, this makes no sense. I'm not interested just in A or B. I'm interested in what's the intersection of what happens when you put A and B together. I'm not interested in a job description where someone else is just telling me what I have to do. I want to go create something that's uniquely not just me in terms of how I can add most value, but I see problems and challenges that no job description seems to be solving. And so this concept of a portfolio and that everything, so the key is everything that you have done, can do, would like to do, that adds value to society and makes you, goes into your portfolio. So every skill you have, whether you've been paid for it or not, every role you've had, whether you've had a title or not, all of your volunteer experience, if you have kids, your parenting skills go in there for sure. All of your travels, all of your immersions, all of your learnings. In my case, losing both of my parents when I was 20, there's no place for that on my resume. And yet it totally makes and drives why I do what I do and how I do it. And so my status is having lost both my parents, effectively being an orphan. That's part of my portfolio. And this has allowed me to basically pursue opportunities where I look like no other candidate and have ended up securing the opportunity. It's also allowed me to continue to refine and update and upgrade my own professional identity in a way that not only maps with my own personal evolution, but it also maps really well with the future of work. So as I like to say, having a career portfolio helps make you unautomatable, so to speak, because no one knows the implications, full implications of automation. Each one of us has to actually take control and responsibility for our own career, and curating your portfolio is one way to do so. So just a couple quick footnotes on this. I always love to underscore and remind people, each and every one of you, whether you're joining virtually or in person today, whether you've had however many jobs you have or haven't had, doesn't matter who you are, everybody who's here today already has a portfolio. You may just not realize it yet. So that's cool, cool out aspect number one. The second is you own your portfolio. So keep in mind here, any job that you have or any job that you're interested in pursuing, any job that someone else gives you, someone else can take away. It is your job while you have it, but there's no entitlement that you keep that job. And I know this might sound a little bit, harsh, but it is the reality of any workforce. And in this world in which we're living, in which there's so many things we can't control, including how long you stay in your job and, whether you get the job that you want or the promotion you want or whatever, your portfolio, you own it and no one can ever take it away from you. So for every student who's here today, you can begin working on your portfolio right now, right here today, that will help prepare you for a future of work, but will map much better to you than, and here I know I've had conversations with the career services teams, both at Fletcher as well as at Friedman, and you're doing great work. But this is the kind of thing that career services too, I think, needs to help every student help curate their portfolio, not simply help students land jobs. Now, jobs are in your portfolio for sure. But in my case, I'll just, bring this up. I joke that every 4 or 5 years, I start something new in my portfolio. And that doesn't always mean a new job. But for the last almost 10 years, I've actually been independent. So I currently work for myself. I have no boss. I have no direct reports. I'm working with lots of different people every day. I was able to do that because I had enough in my portfolio that it was very clear to me what I could go do that no one else could. And that I had a venture that gave me much more meaning and flexibility and agency over my own life. But prior to that, just to give you guys an example of the kinds of things I was doing before. So I am a lawyer, so I spent some time practicing law. I did work on microfinance and financial inclusion. So I did that as an executive for a couple different international social enterprises. I was a hiking and biking guide for some time. I am a certified yoga teacher. I'm an investor. Now, you see, all of these things in a traditional sense would be looked at as like, you're crazy, you're scattered. Like, how can you do all of this stuff at once? And this is where I think Bhaskar sometimes feels exhausted because it's like, you're doing how many things? But each one of those actually brings a piece of me alive. And so I think all of us have these many different facets to our identity, and a portfolio helps you collect and curate and present that that series of things, all of which make you to potential employers, but they also set you up really well to do your own thing if that's something you'd like to do as well.
Great, thank you, April, for that. And I know that this is a point where a lot of people would love to ask you some questions, but I'm going to take the prerogative of owning the owl eye for now, and actually ask a question about how to think about the portfolio. And I'm going to put myself in the shoes of our students and remember about 100 years back when I was at their stage in life and feeling, a little insecure about what's ahead. And by definition, if you come to Fletcher, you already have a sort of a portfolio and intersectional mindset, right? So you're not thinking about people who have a linear path. However, you have made this deep commitment to graduate education. You've invested money, time, mental energy, got to become a part of a community that when you came here, you didn't really know. And then you're concerned about what comes on the other side of the Fletcher tunnel. And when one thinks about a portfolio in the sense of a financial portfolio, a portfolio manager is sort of creating a mix of investments that are almost perfectly balanced. They're in some kind of harmony. They diversify the risk while maximizing the return, you said. Or you think about the artist portfolio. You have the curator of a Picasso show where they kind of say, okay, well, Picasso, let's take a little bit of the blue period, let's take a little bit of cubism, let's take a little bit of the sculpture, and we have the whole array of Picasso and then some early period Picasso. But then it turns out that when you follow the footsteps of Picasso, it wasn't as if he started out curating these different things. He didn't have an intention to do all this. It was just, he got tired of this thing, he moved on to something else. There was an accident, he was kicked out of something else, and then he said, okay, to heck with them, to that school, I'll start this other school. So a lot of portfolio is accident, it's rejection, it's being thrown out of a job, it's being unemployed, and then you have to start your own thing. So I'm curious about how, if you are in your late 20s, say, and I'm just a few years beyond that, how does one think about this future as a curated experience versus leaving yourself open to accidents? And potentially,
I love this.
Yeah, probably thrown out. Yeah.
Well, and I would argue that each of those things you just described for Picasso, they were just change. And some of those were unexpected change. So losing a job, getting kicked out of somewhere, they were unexpected changes. They were the changes we don't like. And it's all about how do you respond to those changes. But there's an element of openness, and there's a beautiful dance that's happening here. And again, it goes back to this tension between mindset and strategy. When I say curate a portfolio career, I do not mean leave everything. It's not just kind of go after whatever and let chance and happenstance take root. It is about being open to opportunities that if you followed strictly a linear path, you would never see. You would rule them out. It's about balancing there's totally a strategy, if you will, around how to create and curate your portfolio. And the chapter in the book goes into the nuts and bolts and some of the technicalities of like, what do you actually do? And I outline 5 steps. But keep in mind, they're unique to everyone because everyone's portfolio will be unique because each one of us has different lived experience. So there's a strategy behind it, but there is absolutely an openness to see things. And here, I guess I am bleeding into a couple of the other Flux Superpowers. They are independent, but they do relate to one another. The 2 that come to mind, though, are getting lost, stretching beyond your comfort zone, and seeing what's invisible. Where do you actually see value? And for a lot of people, when we think about talent in your job and so forth, we place value in what's your title, right? Or what's your salary. And those are metrics, but they're simply labels. So when you're developing your strategy around what do I want to be in my portfolio, you are balancing some of those things out. Now, I've had jobs where I've had a title, VP. Okay, people can tick that box if they want to. But when people ask me what my title is today, I'm like, I can give you 10 titles. Any one of them are legitimate. None of them actually defines fully me. Why do we need a title? Because society expects us to have it, not necessarily because we see it. So this all becomes part of your curation and how you tell your narrative. So I will also encourage, though, back to what Bhaskar was saying about the accidents. When accidents or when change happens that you don't want to have happen, how do you respond to that? Do you, in Picasso's case, it just began a new chapter in his book of life. It began a new chapter. He shifted into a new way of painting or a new place to live, which led him to new places to paint and people to meet and all of that. He could have also said, that's the end of my career as an artist. Got to wrap it up. No, he didn't do that. That's the kind of approach that we all need to be taking to this. So I know I'm so happy to be speaking to Fletcherites today because I think the vast majority of people who go to Fletcher are already, it's cross-disciplinary by nature. We're not looking at A or B, we're looking at the intersection. You're primed for this kind of thinking, yet in my experience, and here I am, 17 years after graduating, a lot of my friends at Fletcher and beyond, and I would actually even go as far as to say, not unique to Fletcher, the more people were set on this, I'm pursuing a career in this track and I'm going to, here's my 10-year plan for how my career is going to play out. The more they had that mindset in grad school, the more challenged they actually are today. The more, and I don't want to say unhappy or unsatisfied, but the more they've struggled because they've limited the opportunities that they're open to. So back to all of you, when you're looking at, where might I work? What might I do? How might I want these pieces of my portfolio to interplay, to intersect? What it tends to do is it expands the kinds of jobs that you might be considering upon graduation, because you realize it's not all about one path. And whatever path you choose today, I can almost assure you it will change in the coming years. So broaden your horizons for where you're looking to work, and also recognize, I guess the best way to put this is that it's not that everything has to be done in one set order. That for me, my time as a lawyer years ago absolutely filters into what I do today, even though I'm not practicing law. My time as a hiking and biking guide, which is what I did prior to Fletcher, That shows up in droves every single day. My time in global development shapes my perspective. Now, I didn't have the luxury or the privilege of scripting exactly what happened in order, right? I just had to be open to the opportunities, but paying attention to how these different stories and narratives intersected and taught me new skills, and how I could then take a skill that I learned in one place and apply it to a completely different kind of setting, a completely different kind of organization. And that takes time, but it also takes sort of deliberate thinking about how these dots connect. And so that's the piece that I really want to drive home today, that I get that you're thinking about like, but I need to have a sense of what comes next. You also need to get really comfortable with not knowing. And when you're not clear, the more you try to predict exactly what's going to happen, the more fraught your experience is going to be. And I know I say this knowing it is one of the hardest things for humans to do. But even just a little bit of opening up and saying, you know, that's not what my resume would say I'm supposed to go do. And here I'll add a little bit of an anecdote back to what happened in my early 20s. The way that I like to describe sometimes what happened in the aftermath of my parents' accident is that I was asking these questions, you know, if I were to die tomorrow, what does the world need me to do today? That led me to make very, very different decisions about my career, which in retrospect, I've not regretted for a minute. And I wish more people could ask those kinds of questions younger. The way I will often characterize it is that I had the equivalent of like a midlife crisis when I was 20, because I was really looking at, if I have limited time here, what am I supposed to do? And society was telling me, and again, I say this with all due respect to investment banks and consulting firms and law firms and all the rest where I did work, but society was saying, with your credentials, you need to go work at a consulting firm or an investment bank. And I was like, well, okay, you know, I like finance and I think consulting is super interesting, but if I'm going to die tomorrow, is that what the world needs me to do? And every time I was like, no, the world does not need me to be a consultant. The world needs me to go and forge new territory, working with the economically active poor in the developing world, creating stuff that doesn't currently exist. And that's my version of this story. Everyone has their version. I just encourage us to think hard about what is it that makes you uniquely you, and how can you curate your portfolio around that, which requires being open, requires not knowing, and requires being kind and gentle to yourself, saying, you're not supposed to have it all figured out. And anyone who tells you that you do, they actually, you know, I feel like that's a bit of an illusion as well. But you are far more capable of doing far more things than society often treats you as being able to do, because we've only looked at what's on your resume, and everything that's off it doesn't seem to have a place in today's workplace, but it very much has a place in the future of work. So I will get off my soapbox now, because I know it's quite opinionated, but it's one of the things that really frustrates me, because we're looking at a huge opportunity, and like, to be able to curate, it's never been more within reach for many, many people to create and curate their portfolios. And it's no longer stigmatized. It's really seen as something that's very cool, and more people wish they could do it.
Yeah, well, we'll keep you on your soapbox, April, because that's why we're all here. So let's open this up for questions. I'm sure you've sort of catalyzed a whole bunch of questions, both in the room and in the Zoom. So where are we going to go? Let's look for some. Let's look for some hands, electronic hands up on the screen, and we'll look for some real hands in the room in front of me. I'll start with the screen.
Don't be shy. Come on, you're Fletcherites.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go.
Who was
Kelly?
it? Kelly? Okay, we go with Kelly, and then I'm going to come back to the room. All right, go ahead.
All right, first I want to say I was just reading, whoever shared the blog post, I just briefly read, and you said something about having this urge to change things about every 4 years. And I've lived like that too, so that really speaks to me. But I'm curious, so now I'm in a PhD program, right, which lasts like 4 to 5 years. And one of my biggest fears is, what happens when I finish this and I get an itch to do something different, because I'm 40 and I've got decades now of that same desire to change every 3 to 4 years. So now that I've invested a lot of time in myself in my career, do you have any thoughts about how to approach that line of thinking or that career trajectory moving forward, knowing that I like to navigate different things?
Yeah, great question. And I mean, part of me says, well, there's a piece in this. It's not about what your PhD is in, but there's a piece that's like, what is your PhD? Because your PhD is just, it's equipping you to do that many more things. An academic track is one. Creating your own thing is another. So let me ask you, just so that I have something more tangible to bolt this to, but it's not about your discipline, but let's make this easy. What is your PhD in?
Technically it's in nutrition, but let me give you this piece. I started with a background in research in psychology.
Yep.
I wanted to move toward nutrition. I didn't know how to get into the PhD program yet, so I went to a culinary program. I really wanted to get back to research, but to blend that with nutrition and my psychology background. So now that's what I'm pursuing with my thesis, psychology, cognitive outcomes related to nutrition.
Oh my gosh. But you also have culinary skill. Like,
Yeah.
this is great. Okay. You are like, you are a career portfolioist, whether you know it or not, or like it or not. This is awesome. So how many people do you know who have all of those skills that you just outlined related? In the middle, there is this piece around, we can call it food. We can call it sustenance. We can call it the ability, we can call it nurture. Food is something that does much more than just feed us, right? There's mental health around that. There's global development. I mean, food, what is it? We can live, well, the only thing we can't live, we can live, we need water and air more than, sooner than we need food, but that's about it, right? Like, humans depend on this. So if you think about, this is where it gets really fun, and the article does a little bit of this. I encourage people on day one to try to draw their portfolio, which looks like a lot of draw everything that would be in it, but then the connections between. And then basically from there, the output is, what are the opportunities? Could be, again, jobs that I go after. It could also be, what are ventures, things that need to exist in this world that I could help contribute to, maybe create, maybe go find allies and partners who are in other organizations doing this sort of thing. But when you mix and match the things that are in your portfolio, and I'm guessing that there's stuff beyond nutrition and psychology and culinary skills that you also like to do, maybe I'll just throw one out, travel. Okay, what you've just done, imagine taking those skills on the road. You have an incredible combination of skills that a lot, and hear me out. I know I've just met you, but I'm guessing quite a few people have one of those skills, right? They've got their PhD in their program, they've got something that's siloed. For you, the value, I love thinking about this as 1 + 1 = 11. What are those opportunities that actually harness 2 or 3 or 4 of those skills together? That's the fun part. That's what portfolio curation is about. But when you talk about wanting to do something different every few years, you're dealing with a portfolio that gives you incredible leverage to do that. Now, no one is going to do that for you. So this sense, I call it shedding a skin every few years, right? I shed a skin. And I will admit that when that sentiment comes up and I'm like, oh my God, I can feel another, chapter in my book of life. And there's this moment of again, oh my God, this is a lot of work, right? But there's also this sense of elation, and that I'm going to get to level up, and that I'm going to have to work hard to figure out that next thing. But that next thing is going to be something that, and I don't want to sound exclusive about this, but it's going to be something that no one else is going to be able to do, because it's what makes me. It's mine. I'm curating, I'm birthing that, so to speak. And so for you, I think that one of the next steps is to do a kind of exercise between the different, if you think about your portfolio. In the HBR piece, we decided to write it, to draw it as a kind of network where you've got different nodes in the network, and then they're all connected in different ways. And that you do that with your own portfolio. And then you start to see some really interesting connections between different things in your portfolio that you may not have been able to see before. I don't know that fully answers your question, but I love where you're heading. And I can assure you, you have a very enviable portfolio already.
Well, thanks. I've also been told my resume makes no sense.
Makes no sense. Right, exactly. And more there are people saying your resume is awesome. The world needs more resumes like yours, because we're learning that within organizations and more broadly in society, siloed thinking, singular tracks. We do need people, obviously you want depth of expertise. You have a PhD, for goodness sakes. You have depth of expertise. We need people, some of you might have heard of like I people and then T people, which are both deep. So I people are deep in one subject. T people are deep, and then they also can see beyond their expertise. Then you've got pi people, like the pi symbol, which are deep in more than one discipline, but also can see the big picture. And then we've got X people, people who can basically reach into new horizons, reach into new disciplines with great comfort. So I would say you're somewhere between a pi person and an X person, which is also what the world needs. So thank you. I see another question. Should I, Bhaskar, do you want to call on people, or I just see?
Yeah, because I have some questions in the room as well, April, which you may not be able to see.
Cool.
So that's a great analogy to the pi people and the T people. The only people we don't want are people with just the top of the T. And
Correct.
That could be kind of risky because it's hard to float in without something below you. All right, go ahead. And please introduce yourself and just say a little bit about what you're studying.
Come there, so you can see me.
I think the all will see.
We'll
you.
see, we'll get you. Hi, well, I'm Shara. I absolutely loved your talk and I resonated with so much of what you said. One, I am also someone who's done a bunch of things and a bunch of seemingly random things. Like I did a course in dog training. I'm a music therapist in India. I was a music therapist for cancer patients, and I am also a certified yoga teacher. I also happen to be a lawyer, and that's why it seemed extremely like I was speaking to someone 10 years ahead of what I think I see myself as. But I do sometimes feel though that here I joined Fletcher because of its multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary approach, but I do sometimes feel quite lost here because I have an interest in so many things, and I do feel that you did answer part of the question which Kelly just asked, but how do you not broaden your horizons too much? Like, how do you, like, what is too broad a horizon where you are just absolutely lost and don't know where you're going?
Yeah. So what is your name again? Sorry.
It's Shara.
Shara. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to meet you. I'm like, maybe we were like siblings in a past life. I don't know. I will do my best here because I very much, I have again, a partial answer. So I did a joint degree with Fletcher, and I look back and sometimes I feel, in my case, I could have spent the rest of my life at Fletcher. Because I was doing a joint degree, I had very strict credit limits. I could only track into so many things, but I was trying to stretch, and I actually took classes at yet another school, and I wanted to audit more classes, and I was just like, I want to do all of it. But the joint degree forced a kind of discipline, and discipline's too strong of a word. It just gave me it limited my choices because I had to meet all of these different requirements. And so in my case, I had picked, prior to arriving at Fletcher, I had spent several years out largely researching and guiding these hiking and bicycling trips, which to this day was the favorite job, the best job I ever had. I mean, I got paid not a lot of money, but I got paid to ride my bicycle through vineyards and, you know, translate wine tastings, and like, what kind of that was a great job. It just wasn't the career of impact that I wanted. But prior to that, so I had, during my guiding and my travels and whatnot, I had really settled on this emerging concept of microfinance and access to finance and financial inclusion for the economically active poor, which is not, it's much more mainstream today than it was when I got into it, but it was really seen as quite novel. And I still remember, I think I shared this with Bhaskar some time ago, that I did international financial law down at Harvard Law School. And I wrote my third year paper on microfinance or aspects of microfinance. I was really interested in it. And they were like, wait a minute, we're doing international financial markets. If it's not happening in London or Hong Kong or New York, it's not really international markets. And I was like, no, like what's happening in Kenya and Pakistan and Bolivia, like these are international financial markets. Why can't we update our systems and our thinking? Now, some years later, that very same professor was like, hey, you want to come teach a class, guest teach a class? because they realized how what I was doing, again, it was sort of, I don't want to say ahead of the time as though it's about me, but I was doing stuff that was deemed to be very, very fringe at the time, but I believed that it was going to go mainstream and that we could not have inclusive, sustainable global development unless tools like microfinance evolved. So I share this because I showed up to my joint degree program knowing that that one thing was what I was really interested in. But when you think about financial inclusion, all of a sudden, to understand it from a systemic point of view, I was like, wait, I can't just, this isn't just about finance. This is about women and women's empowerment. This is about children and education. This is about water and sanitation. This is about urbanization. This is about like, and all of a sudden I was like, it's about international security. And what's interesting is a couple of years after I graduated, Muhammad Yunus, some of you may be familiar with this space, Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Peace Prize for his pioneering work in microfinance. He didn't win the Nobel Prize in economics because microfinance is quite simple as a tool, but he used it because he earned the Nobel Peace Prize because when we're able to design inclusively for finance, we actually we actually boost peace. We reduce the risk of conflict and war because more people are able to care for their families, create livelihoods, etc. I bring this up because all of a sudden I was like, wait, if I'm interested in microfinance, I need to be studying peace and conflict resolution, right? So I share this because all of a sudden I'm going like, how do I make all this fit? Like anyone looking at my resume is going to be like, she's lost. Here's the hook. I knew what the narrative was, how all of this came back to financial inclusion. So I could say it's peace studies because this, it's water and sanitation because that, it relates to this broader narrative. But if I only studied finance, I'm not going to understand the system that I'm seeking to change and to improve. And so for anyone's case, it's not about having figured out what is that one theme, but I would encourage you to figure out what are 2 or 3 overarching themes, and they can be as large as the SDGs, or pick a couple individual SDGs, or pick, Fletcher even designs their programs quite well around these thematic areas of study. Pick some aspect, and then if you can justify taking a course that seems totally unrelated to the outside world, but you can see the connection between it and this broader theme, take it, put it in your portfolio, but remember what is the narrative you need to tell around that, because then not only are you able to help other people connect those dots, but all of a sudden they look at you and they go, oh my goodness, she saw something I couldn't see. She knows even more about stuff that is related to this issue that perhaps you're applying for a job around. You've all of a sudden added a whole bunch of value that even your interviewer or your potential employer or your potential colleagues didn't see coming. So I don't know, there is this, you need to not worry, or I shouldn't say you need, don't take this as like a rule. I would encourage you to really try to overcome this sense of when you feel lost, or how do I not get lost? Getting lost is one of the 8 Flux superpowers. We all need to get much better at not worrying about being lost. It sounds a little bit trite to say this, but I always like to say that getting lost is actually how we get found. When we are only sticking to the straight and narrow path that other people have put out for us, that's all we're learning. We're not actually learning how to go off-road, how to make new discoveries, how to stretch beyond your comfort zone. And to be able to do that is actually going to serve you really, really well, even beyond your studies, but in life, as we look at a future in flux. But if you can, go back to those big themes and then give yourself leeway to take a whole bunch of different courses, but make sure you're clear on how they connect to the bigger picture narrative and portfolio that you want to build. So again, it fits into a portfolio, even though it may not fit into a traditional resume.
Great, thank you for that, April, and thank you for the question. I think this is a question that I'm sure was on many people's minds, which is, broadening, but then how broad. And I often think in terms of metaphors, April, and usually those metaphors get me into trouble. So the way I think about it is in how you would design a Seinfeld episode, where, like midway through the episode, you have no idea, like there are 15 different stories going on here. And at some point, all of that, sort of comes together, and there is a theme, there's a larger story that connects them all. So let's take one last question, and I'm sure we'll have so many questions that people are going to go home with. So let's take a question from, I guess, Melissa, you get the final one.
Thank you. I'm honored. I actually, it's somewhat of a question, but maybe more of a comment. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, April, as well, because I'm wondering for some of you who are finishing up your degree and wondering, okay, now what? What do I do? It can feel a little bit overwhelming to think about all of the options. And one of the thoughts that I had, April, as you were sharing, is that in some ways, it's not a matter of doing everything. It's a matter of when you do it. So this idea of sequencing, right? So starting out in an organization where you're in a more traditional job, as it were, sometimes is a great step when you're early on in your career and you start to gain some of the social capital or social proof that you need and the practical experience to then launch whatever that next venture is going to be. So have you, is that a topic that you've talked about, April, or just this idea of sequencing?
Yeah, it relates a little bit to what Bhaskar was saying earlier about Picasso and whatnot. Sequencing, yes. I'm also keenly aware that we don't get to control a lot of that. So there's this dance and this balance between sequencing and openness.
Yeah.
And so the way I like to put it is that there are, and obviously there are certain things that are more entry level or mid-career, but again, we get into that career ladder really fast. It's more about, and I'll use the example this is a sort of sideways answer to this because, I went to law school and everyone's like, and I went to law school and I was like, I have no interest in practicing law, but I know the power of a law degree and I want to do public policy work and global development. And that's why I'm here. And everyone's like, okay. And then one of my mentors in microfinance, it was an internship that I had. What was it? It was the summer. I was there for 4 years. So it was the summer after my Fletcher year. After my second of 4 years, but when I had just spent a bunch of time at Fletcher, it was a microfinance internship. And my mentor there, the CEO of a microfinance investment fund, said to me, if you want to really make an impact in microfinance, that's why you went to law school, that's what you care about, I need you to go work at a law firm. Now, I was shocked. My jaw was on the ground. I was like, that's the last place I thought I would work at a law. No, that's not why I went to law school. And she was like, hear me out. And this was, again, some years ago, but it still holds true today. She said, in microfinance, we have lots of people who work in finance, lots of bankers who are interested in this stuff. We do not have enough lawyers who understand how to get these deals done. And in order to get any of these deals done, we need a banker and a lawyer. I need you to go to a law firm and learn the skills so that you speak the language of legalese. I need you to do all the things that you're like, I was like, I'm allergic to doing this sort of thing. It's not what I thought I was going to do. I need you to go and learn enough skills to be helpful to us, she said, and just marginally dangerous so that people will take you seriously. And she's like, and then when you're ready to come back, we will be here with open arms. But I need you to go do this thing that went counter to why I thought I went to law school. But I respected her and trusted what she was saying and saw she helped me again. We were not calling it a portfolio in any way, shape, or form at that point, but I went to a law firm having zero intention of climbing the going partner track, or that was not my thing. I was there to learn skills and to contribute as much as I could. Okay. And actually, this is becoming a little bit of a better story as I'm thinking about it, because you see my portfolio starts to emerge. So I went there going, oh my God, what am I doing? I loved my time at law firms. I'm one of the only people I know who actually love my time at law firms because I wasn't trying to get to partner track. But what I was able to do at law firms, I introduced 2 different law firms to the concept of microfinance and how lawyers could help. And when you think about this from the perspective of corporate finance, you have a lot of, in the legal world, you have a lot of pro bono lawyers who do free representation, but mostly it's in the criminal side of things. So you're representing people in the courtroom. I did not want any part of courtroom criminal law stuff. I wanted to do the transactional stuff. I wanted to do, how do we build better business? And yet you don't have a lot of pro bono opportunities there because most of corporate finance is about making money. And so I was able to say, hey, lawyers, you could use the same skills that you're using to, for a venture capital fund or a bank, same skills, same kinds of deals, but all of a sudden you're helping tens of millions of economically active poor people around the world. You want to help? And I had lawyers basically jump on board. I was able to create new practice areas around what's called social sector finance, so impact investing, which I never would have thought I got to do when I went to work at a law firm. I got to work on those deals. I got to lead some of those deals as a junior associate because I was the only person who in the firm who knew about microfinance. Those things went really well. And then I was like, oh, I think I've learned the skills that I need to go back to do the work I wanted to do. But meanwhile, what I had done was forged a bunch of relationships between financial institutions and banks and policymakers and law firms. So I went back to my mentor who had told me to go to a law firm. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was the best advice you could have given me, but I couldn't see it. So back to your question, Melissa, about just sequencing. Yes, but the sequencing was I had to be open to it. But what ended up happening was I was able to add more value, learn more skills, meet more people, get clearer on my portfolio because I had to be open to something I didn't think I wanted to do. And yet at the end of the day, what I realized was it wasn't about, did I want to practice law or not? It was about, do I want to build bridges? Do I want to help people? I need to know all of the different angles of how I can help them or serve them. And then I need to go do whatever it is that I'm being called to do in order to make that work, including stuff that I didn't think I'd have on my resume, including stuff I didn't think I'd like, but it ended up, all of it serving me really well. Now, that's not to say, did I love my time, the crazy hours I worked as a lawyer? No, they were hard hours. They're not human hours. But I also knew I wasn't doing it forever. I was doing it to get that additional piece into my portfolio to then go build on it elsewhere and do other things. So I think, yeah, sequencing is tricky. Being open to different kinds of sequencing, but you can be deliberate about how the pieces sequence with and into one another.
Yeah, I love that. And I especially love the role that a mentor played in helping you strategize that or just figure out, or she was able to see what you couldn't see. Mm-hmm. That's really powerful. Thanks for sharing that.
Superpower number 2, see what's invisible. So that's a different theme, but yeah, it's she helped me see and being open to, well, this is a tangent. I do think a lot of young people, and myself, I still feel young at heart, finding the importance of finding that mentor and being open to that, but also recognizing that a lot of what our parents were taught and a lot of what an older generation was taught doesn't really align with a lot of what we're talking about in this future of work. Mm-hmm. I will say, however, that I work with a fair number of executives and leaders and boards of directors and so forth. They get the portfolio concept and they're really struggling with, like, we need to make this happen, but it's not what we were raised in. So how do we help? How do we move this forward? And they're actually asking for younger talent to come in and help them effectively co-create some of these solutions, realizing that their script is not fit for today. Younger people's scripts are closer fit, but the only way we're really going to get there is together.
Love that. Love that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question, Melissa. And we managed to dig into only 1 out of 8 superpowers. The remaining 7, go get the book. Highly recommended. April, you certainly opened our minds to a lot of things and gave us a lot to think about. I'm going to close on the metaphor of a bridge that you just brought up. And the one thing that I take away is that if you think about a bridge, it's actually you argued against the bridge, because what a bridge does is it gets you from one side of the river to the other in a direct linear path. And what I sort of took away from this conversation is kind of going back to the old Chinese saying. Maybe that's apocryphal. There's no such Chinese saying, but it's like Yogi Berra said almost everything that is wise. That cross the river while feeling for the stones, right? So what I hear is that you cross the river, but you're not necessarily purposefully trying to get to the other side. You eventually might, but you feel for the stones, and each stone you step on, you step on with an eye not towards the other side of the river, but to kind of say, where does this stone lead me to? What other interesting stones does it lead me to? And then I kind of step on the, and we've all done this. We've kind of stepped on stones so I can get to a larger rock over there and I feel a little bit safer and I've learned something and I go someplace else. So that's at least one image. I as I said, I use metaphors often to encapsulate very complex conversations. And this was about as complex a conversation I can imagine about one's own career. And I started out by saying that April leaves me exhausted. You can see why, because she's got so many different ideas that sort of simultaneously are playing in her head, and she is contagious in transmitting it to others. So I certainly felt that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhaskar. I will add a footnote. I love that you bring up the river, nature. So when I talk about building bridges, you're right. I'm not talking about hard infrastructure. I'm talking about the figurative bridges, and nature is actually one of our best teachers around flux. Nature does, whether it's a river, whether it's bamboo that you referred to earlier, nature does what nature was intended to do, but it finds both the path, I don't want to say just of least resistance, but it finds opportunities to grow even when we can't see it. So spot on. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, April. We'll let you go off. It's 7:30 here and hopefully a little bit earlier in the day for you.
Yeah.
But we've seen the future. We can tell you it's going to be dark.
Thank you all. And if anyone wants to connect with me, I put a couple links in the chat. I'm super easy, april@aprilrinne.com. I'd love to get your questions about Flux, about portfolio careers, about my time at Fletcher, you name it. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.